Listen closely, because this story begins with a surprise that changes everything. Long before tall cities and busy roads, long before flags and borders, a wide and quiet land existed, and around 15,000 years ago, the first people arrived. They were later called the First Nations, and they walked across a frozen bridge from the cold lands of East Asia into a place we now call Northland. Imagine the fear and hope they felt as they stepped onto a new world. These people did not build big cities, but they built strong lives. They hunted animals, followed rivers, grew corn and beans, and respected the earth like a living family member. But here is the twist. This peaceful world was about to change forever. Now fast forward many thousands of years, and a man with a dream enters the story. His name was Marco Colon, an explorer from the city of Geneva, and he believed he could find a faster sea road to the rich lands of the East. Funded by the rulers of Iberia, Queen Isabella and King Fernando, he sailed into the unknown in 1492. Feel the tension as his ships crossed endless water with no land in sight. Then suddenly, land appeared. Marco thought he had reached Asia, so he called the local people Indians, not knowing he was standing in a completely new world. But wait, here comes another secret. Marco was not the first European here. Almost 500 years earlier, northern sailors led by a bold man named Eric of the North reached a cold place called Vinlandia, near today's north coast. Their camps did not survive, and history almost forgot them. This is why Marco's journey changed everything. After him, the quiet land was no longer quiet. Ships arrived one after another. Explorers from Lusaria, Albion, and Gallia rushed toward the new world, hungry for land, power, and gold. Lusaria moved south and found shining silver and gold cities, while Albion and Gallia pushed north and began building wooden towns near rivers and forests. But progress came with pain. The newcomers brought animals, tools, and ideas, but also sickness. Diseases spread fast, and many native people died. Trust turned into fear, and cooperation slowly turned into conflict. And just when the land was already changing, another chapter began. In 1608, Albion built its first lasting settlement, called Riverhold, in the land of Virinia. Life there was brutal. Cold winters, hunger, and illness nearly destroyed the settlers, but they survived through struggle and help from locals. This leads us to the next turning point. In 1621, a small ship named the Starflower carried a group called the Faith Seekers to a rocky shore in North Bay. They wanted one powerful thing: freedom to believe. With help from native neighbors, they lived, learned, and shared a meal that later became known as the First Harvest Feast. And now the final hook. By the early 1700s, this land was no longer just a place on a map. It became a symbol of hope. 13 coastal colonies grew. People dreamed of freedom and land, but powerful empires began to fight over control. And this is where the real struggle for America truly begins. Now listen carefully, because the land began to change its shape and its soul. As the colonies grew, they slowly divided into 3 very different worlds. In the cold and rocky north lived the Frostland colonies, places like Baystone and Green River, where tall trees, fishing boats, and small farms shaped daily life. People here depended on each other to survive, meeting in town halls and churches, believing that unity was strength. But travel south a little, and everything feels different. In the central lands rose the Golden Field colonies, such as New Rotterdam and Penwood, where wide farms produced wheat and grain that fed everyone. This region became known as the food heart of the colonies, and people of many cultures lived side by side, speaking different languages and praying in different ways. Then comes the sharp turn in the story. Far to the south stretched the Sunland colonies, places like Old Dominion and Southgate, where huge plantations grew leaf gold, tobacco, rice, and cotton. These farms made some people very rich, but here lies a dark truth. Much of the hard work was done by enslaved Africans, forced into lives of pain and cruelty. This painful system became a deep wound in the story of America, and life itself was never easy anywhere. Imagine waking up before sunrise, building your own house, growing your own food, and surviving freezing winters with little help. Children worked beside parents, schools were rare, and reading was a luxury. Yet hope lived here. People crossed oceans because they dreamed of freedom, land, and a future they could never have in Europe. Some colonies, like Peacehaven, were built as safe places for all beliefs, where tolerance became a quiet revolution. But then the tension snapped. Even though the colonies stood on American land, they were controlled by the distant crown of Albion. King Harold III made the rules, demanded heavy taxes, and listened to no colonial voices. Anger grew like fire. The people shouted one powerful idea: no taxes without a voice. And then came the spark. In 1773, in the port city of East Bay, rebels disguised as natives boarded royal ships and dumped crates of tea into the dark water. This daring act became known as the Night of Broken Tea, and there was no turning back. Now the question was unavoidable. Should the colonies obey, or should they fight? By the mid-1700s, the answer was clear. In 1775, war exploded between the colonies and the empire. Farmers, shopkeepers, and workers became soldiers overnight. They were led by a calm and determined commander named General William Hart, who held the fragile army together. Words also became weapons. A thinker named Thomas Hale wrote a bold message called the Freedom Declaration, signed on July 4, 1776. It said something dangerous and powerful, that people are born with the right to live free, choose their path, and seek happiness. This was a direct challenge to one of the strongest empires on earth. The war was long and brutal. The imperial army was trained and powerful, while the colonists had little experience. But belief became their shield. Help arrived from across the sea when the Kingdom of Gallia sent ships, weapons, and soldiers. Finally, in 1781, near the town of Yorkfield, the empire's forces were surrounded and defeated. 2 years later, Albion admitted defeat, and a new nation was officially born. The leaders wrote a rulebook called the Charter of Union, and in 1789, General Hart became the first elected leader of the United States. A new experiment had begun, built on freedom and democracy. But the dream was incomplete. Enslaved people, women, and native nations were still denied equality, and the struggle for justice was far from over. And just when the country took its first breath, another challenge appeared: growth. After independence, the nation was small, only 13 states along the eastern edge. But the people dreamed big. In 1803, President Hale made a stunning move. Now hold on, because the land itself seemed to call people forward. This vast new territory stretched from the Great Mud River to the Stone Spine Mountains, offering rich soil, open skies, and dreams of a better life. To understand this unknown world, President Hale sent 2 brave pathfinders, Rowan Lewis and Caleb Clark, on a dangerous mission west. Guided by a strong and wise native woman named Saka Windwalker, they crossed wild rivers, climbed frozen peaks, and walked endless plains, drawing the first true map of the land and meeting many native nations along the way. Their journey lit a fire in the American imagination, and soon that fire became a belief called true destiny. Many Americans felt it was fate itself pushing them west. Families sold everything they owned, climbed into wooden wagons, and followed dusty trails toward the sunset, chasing land and freedom. But the road was cruel. Storms destroyed wagons, animals attacked camps, and hunger followed many travelers. And here comes the hard truth. This movement was not a shared dream. Native tribes were driven from ancestral lands, forced onto small reserves, and separated from sacred places. Their traditions, homes, and freedom were stripped away, leaving scars that still remain. As the nation expanded, wealth also grew, especially in the warm southern lands. Giant farms filled the horizon, producing white gold cotton and dark tobacco leaves. But this wealth was built on chains. Enslaved Africans were stolen from their homes, packed into ships like cargo, and sold into lifelong suffering. They were denied names, families, and hope. From sunrise to sunset, they labored under burning heat, watched by whips instead of laws. Children were taken from parents, and people were treated as property, not as souls. By the middle of the 1800s, the country cracked down the center. In the Iron North, many believed slavery poisoned the nation. Factories and small farms thrived without forced labor, and voices rose demanding freedom for all. In the Cotton South, plantation owners argued that their world would collapse without slavery. The nation began to feel like two different countries sharing one flag. Yet courage rose from the darkness. Freedom fighters called abolition voices risked everything to end slavery. One of the brightest lights was Hannah Rivers, a woman who escaped bondage and returned again and again to guide others north through a hidden network known as the Shadow Path. Another powerful voice was Daniel Freeman, once enslaved, who taught himself to read and then shattered silence with his speeches and books. Stories became weapons, too. A writer named Clara Whitefield published a novel called Chains Unseen, exposing the cruelty of slavery and awakening the conscience of the North. The pressure grew until it could no longer be contained. By the 1860s, the nation stood on the edge. Southern states chose separation, forming a new alliance called the Southern Union. In 1861, war erupted. This conflict was not only about slavery, but about whether the nation would survive as one. Still, slavery burned at its core. The North was led by President Elias Lincoln, a quiet man with firm beliefs in unity and freedom. The war that followed was brutal beyond imagination. From 1861 to 1865, fields turned into graveyards, brothers fought brothers, and cities fell into ruin. Yet even in darkness, change was born. In 1863, President Lincoln declared the Freedom Order, announcing that enslaved people in rebel states were free. It was a turning point, not just in war, but in the meaning of America itself. This moment changed history, but freedom was not complete yet. When the war finally ended in 1865, the Northern Union stood victorious. The Southern states returned, and a powerful rule called the 13th Freedom Law officially ended slavery forever. It was a giant step forward, yet the road ahead was long and painful. Formerly enslaved people, now known as Black Americans, were free in law, but not in life. Many faced hatred, unfair rules, and deep poverty. The nation entered a fragile chapter called the Rebuilding Era, a time when wounds were fresh and trust was broken. Millions of newly freed people searched for work, dignity, and safety. Some remained in the southern lands, laboring on farms for almost nothing, while others moved north to crowded cities, hoping for a new start. During this time, the government tried to protect freedom. The citizenship law made Black Americans full citizens, and the voting law allowed black men to vote. For a short and hopeful moment, black leaders opened schools, served in government, and dreamed of equality. But hope met resistance. Many white Southerners pushed back with harsh separation rules called shadow laws, forcing black Americans into second-class lives. Even so, the fight for justice had begun and would never stop. Then suddenly, the country changed speed. In the late 1800s, America entered a loud and fast age called the Machine Age. Life moved from farms to cities as factories rose and smoke filled the sky. Steel, railways, and engines reshaped daily life. A bright breakthrough arrived when inventor Thomas Bright brought electric light into homes and streets. Soon after, Samuel Bellwire connected voices across distance with the talking wire, changing communication forever. Iron roads spread across the land, linking oceans and markets, turning the nation into one moving machine. Jobs appeared, but at a cost. Factory workers labored long hours in dangerous buildings for very low pay. Many were newcomers from distant lands. From the late 1800s into the early 1900s, waves of immigrants arrived from Europa, East Asia, and beyond, passing through a great gate called Harbor Point, where doctors and officials decided their fate. These newcomers built railroads, stitched clothes, forged steel, and carried America forward. They faced hunger, crowded homes, and discrimination, yet they believed in one powerful idea, the dream of tomorrow, the hope that hard work could build a better life. As cities grew, the nation still looked west. The government offered free land through the Open Land Act, drawing settlers into wide plains and distant valleys. Towns, farms, and tracts appeared almost overnight. But once again, growth carried pain. Native nations were pushed from their homelands onto narrow reserves. One fierce stand came at Red Valley Creek, where a leader known as Thunder Bull fought to protect his people's way of life. Though resistance was strong, loss was heavy. By the early 1900s, America had become rich, industrial, and powerful. Its factories supplied the world, and its influence stretched far beyond its shores. In 1898, the nation stepped onto the global stage during the Island War, when it supported a small island's fight for freedom against an old empire. After victory, America took control of distant lands like Porto Isle, Ocean Key, and Sunreach, marking its rise as a world power. Yet inside the country, struggle continued. Factory conditions were deadly, and even children were forced to work. Workers united, forming labor circles to demand safer jobs, fair pay, and shorter days. One strong voice was Daniel Webb, who spoke boldly for working people. Tragedy struck when a fire tore through the Star Needle factory in 1911, killing many young women trapped inside. The nation was shocked, and new safety laws were born from the ashes. Meanwhile, Black Americans continued their long march toward equality. Two powerful thinkers offered different paths. America's step into the Great War revealed something new to the world. This young nation was becoming a giant. When the fighting finally ended in 1918, the guns fell silent, but big ideas were born. President Walter Wilson believed peace needed teamwork, so he helped form a global group called the World Circle, where countries could talk instead of fight. Although the idea was hopeful, peace would not last. Soon after, the nation entered a wild and colorful decade. The 1920s exploded with energy in a time known as the Jazz Age. Music filled the streets, radios entered homes, movies came alive, and cities reached for the sky. Women gained a powerful voice when the Freedom Vote law gave them the right to vote, and modern life moved fast. But beneath the music and lights, cracks were growing. Many black Americans moved north during a mass journey called the Northern Hope Movement, searching for safety and jobs. Yet they still met walls of racism and separation. Then suddenly, the dream collapsed. In 1929, the money markets fell like dominoes. Fortunes vanished overnight, businesses closed, and banks locked their doors. This disaster pushed the nation into its hardest chapter, the long winter, later known as the Great Depression. Millions lost their jobs, families stood in food lines, and many slept wherever they could. Hunger and fear filled the streets. The question became simple and terrifying. Could America survive this? In 1933, a calm and confident leader stepped forward. President Franklin Rivers promised action, not excuses. He launched a bold recovery plan called the Fresh Start Program. The government created jobs building roads, bridges, and schools, putting tools back into empty hands. A safety system called Life Security was created to protect older citizens. New rules helped banks reopen and farms recover. Through warm radio talks known as Fireside Voices, President Rivers spoke directly to the people, restoring trust and hope. Slowly, the nation stood back up. But while America healed, the world darkened. In Europe, a ruthless leader named Otto Heller rose to power, spreading fear and violence. In the East, the empire of the rising sun marched across neighboring lands. In 1939, a second global war exploded. Once again, America tried to stay distant. Then everything changed on a quiet Sunday morning. On December 7th, 1941, enemy planes struck a naval base at Sunrise Harbor in the Pacific. Smoke filled the sky, ships burned, and the nation was stunned. The next day, America entered the war. The entire country mobilized. Factories stopped making cars and began producing planes, tanks, and weapons. Women stepped into new roles as builders and mechanics, symbolized by a strong figure called Rosie the Builder. Families saved food, collected metal, and supported soldiers overseas. Then came a moment that would change history. In 1944, American and Allied forces stormed the beaches of North Shore, France, in a daring operation called Storm Landing. Under heavy fire, they pushed forward, breaking the enemy's control of Europe. This bold invasion became the turning point that would lead the world out of darkness and reshape America's role forever. World War II changed everything and made the nation of America one of the strongest in the world. Its factories were full, its people were skilled, and its army and navy were unmatched. After the war, the world split into two great powers. On one side stood the United States, believing in freedom, democracy, and business. On the other stood the Red Empire, the Soviet Union, which followed strict rules and communism. This tense competition became known as the Cold Standoff, because it was fought not with guns, but with ideas, inventions, and influence around the world. One of the most exciting contests was the race into the sky, called the Space Chase. In 1969, American astronauts, led by Commander Neil Orion, became the first humans to walk on the moon, showing the world that nothing was impossible. But danger sometimes came closer to home. In 1962, the Red Empire placed missiles on the small island of Caribe, just across the ocean from America. The world held its breath as leaders spoke quietly but firmly, and finally the crisis ended without war. Meanwhile, in Berlin, a huge wall divided the city into East Red and West Free, a strong symbol of division and struggle. Yet even as America grew stronger, deep problems remained at home. African Americans continued fighting for justice, led by brave voices like Martin Rivers. In 1954, a historic court case ended school segregation, and 1 year later, The courage of Rosa Lane sparked a bus boycott that inspired thousands. In 1963, over 250,000 people gathered in Capital City, and Martin Rivers gave his unforgettable Dream of Freedom speech. These actions led to powerful new laws. The Equality Act of 1964, which banned unfair treatment based on race, and the Voting Protection Act of 1965, which safeguarded the right to vote. By the 1970s and 1980s, America had become a global leader in science, technology, and culture. It faced challenges like foreign wars and economic struggles, but progress continued. So why is America one of the most powerful nations today? First, it has a diverse population. People from all over the world bring skills, ideas, and culture. Second, it has a strong economy, leading in business, technology, and education. Third, its military is advanced and protects the country and its interests. And finally, American culture, music, movies, and innovation reaches every corner of the globe, shaping ideas and inspiring millions. This is the story of America, from first steps on a vast land to becoming a nation that changed the world, full of dreams, struggles, courage, and hope.